What's up, everybody? Matt Vogt here, back with another episode of the Lifestyle Practice Podcast and the second half of our interview with Vince Nardone. As you all may know or may not know, here at TLP, along with my partners, Derek and Steve, we help our fellow colleagues, dentists just like you all, elevate your lives and careers through dental practice ownership. Head on over to our website, thelifestylepractice.com. And while you're there, you can fill out a free lifestyle and assessment survey. It's got some questions on there about your current practice, if you're already a practice owner, or if you're not, what you're looking for in a practice or where you're at and how we can help. Shoot that over to us, and Derek, Steve, or I will get back to you with some advice on your specific situation. No commitment necessary. We want to help. And if that means you want to work with us long term, great. We'd love to do that. That's what we do. But if not, hopefully you're armed with some information to continue to elevate your own life and career and build your own lifestyle practice. So today we're bringing you the second half of my interview with Vince Nardone of Benesh Law. Vince, if you hadn't listened to the first episode, go back and listen to that. He is a dental lawyer with decades of experience advising both buyers and sellers on matters that are very, very important to their practices, not just in transitions and acquisitions, startups, any real legal matters in the dental field. I'm just constantly blown away by Vince's expertise anytime I talk to him. And I learn something new every time I'm interacting with Vince. So today we've got that second half of our conversation. And that topic of conversation is things dentists mess up or should do better or can do better in practice transitions. From a buyer or a seller perspective, what are some things that Vince sees that we all could be doing better or preparing for in a practice transition? I mean, even in our conversation today, Vince has helped me become a better coach for my clients as we're working through these situations. And I think you'll glean a lot of great information from this conversation today. Even if you've already purchased a practice, Vince talks a lot about, what you should be thinking about to eventually prepare your practice for a sale down the road. So I think this is going to be a productive episode no matter where you're at in your ownership journey. All right, without any further ado, here is Vince Nardone. I have run into this from my perspective on a lot of potential acquisitions where it's funny, this part of you could call it a negotiation or part of the process of an acquisition sometimes tends to make the seller or the broker who's trying to make a commission on a sale get kind of antsy, right? They're like, hey, let's move this along. Why are we discussing this? I really want to sell by this date. And I feel like it's really easy for this part of the evaluation of the practice to get overlooked. But it's so important because, like you said, if your vision is to have a multi-doctor practice, but yet you're acquiring a 5-op practice, well, we've got to have some sort of pathway to expand that practice if that's your ultimate goal, and hopefully expand it as easily as possible. It's funny to me how often I hear doctors say, well, if I grow and outgrow the space, I'll just leave and I'll build a building at some point. Like, that is a task, right? Oh, also you have a lease here and you have an agreement. And so that's always an option, sure. But like you mentioned, we don't want to be running into that so soon after our practice is acquired if we can avoid it. But something that's always jarring to me as we're going through this aspect of things is how there's almost pressure sometimes from the other side to just say, hey, let's get this done. Let's get this done. And that's where someone like you has stepped in both for me and aspects of my practice dealings and my clients. And you say, hey, pump the brakes here. This is important. And we've got to think about this.
That's right. And that's where it comes back to that buyer's mentality again, which is always be in a position where you're willing to walk away. And I think that if you do a good job expressing that to, if there's a broker involved or to the selling doctor, it also just puts you in a better negotiating position. Mm-hmm. If you walk in there and say, oh my gosh, I want this practice and I want to buy it today, it's like walking into the car dealership and the first thing that they ask you is, well, how much do you want to spend on a monthly basis?
Yeah.
I have the perfect car for you.
Yeah.
So we certainly want to slow that process down. And yes, we could get some pressure from a broker when we start asking a lot of questions, but these are important questions to make sure that you have a space to operate in for the long term. So that's certainly one of the terms that we see is just the overall lease, the opportunity potentially to acquire the property if it's the selling doctor who's also owns the property in a related party entity. And therefore there's opportunity and maybe a little bit of leverage right now to negotiate what that purchase price would look like on the real estate. So just something to be talking about and thinking about as we're moving on in the process.
And these are all things too that, that aren't purchase price, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. You can often throw the seller a bone by satisfying their purchase price wants and then looking at these important details and using the paying of full price or satisfying the seller's want for their purchase price to, in essence, get some of these details ironed out that might be in your favor as a buyer.
That's right, because it also could transition into a discussion about the selling doctor, him or herself, right? In terms of, is this a practice acquisition where the doc's walking away? Or is this a practice acquisition where the doc plans on sticking around for a period of time? And how does that align with your goals and what that may or may not look like for you? And it's something to really consider and be thoughtful about, because I have seen a lot of those not go so well in terms of that transition with the selling doc. And so you really have to make sure that you understand from an expectation standpoint what the selling doctor is looking for and what the buying doctor is looking for. And if we're willing to give on the purchase price, then there's more likely some flexibility on other terms, as you just mentioned. So kind of putting that into perspective, as an example, on the lease, on the monthly rent of the lease, on the ability to purchase the real estate, what that value may look like. If the doc is staying on, the selling doctor post-closing, what that compensation looks like, whether they're looking for benefits or expense reimbursement. That big picture of those other economic buckets for the selling doctor are also something that can be negotiated after you have kind of established what that purchase price already is, or you're looking at all of those collectively together to make sure that you understand big picture again, how all of that's going to impact you. And that kind of goes back to our kind of the cash flow projection, right? Of what are we looking at the end of the day? So something to be certainly considering.
Yeah, let's can we dive into the discussion about the seller doctor a little
For
bit,
sure.
because that kind of struck a nerve with me and that was on my notes to discuss with you today, because I bet you've seen that go really well at times and I bet you've seen it go really wrong, and I think it would be helpful to hear a little bit of your perspective about how we can make it a graceful transition, whether the seller doctor's staying on or they desire to stay on, or whether they want a clean split. How do we make this as positive as possible for both parties? Because we know how important preserving that goodwill is. That's what you're buying, right? You're buying the goodwill of the doctor with the current patients and trying to transfer that to yourself as cleanly as possible. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, and would love to talk about the concept of goodwill at some point as well, because that's a really big one there in terms of the transitioning of that goodwill and what the strategies are for doing so. But sticking with the selling doc for a moment, I think it's important for us to take a step backwards and to put ourselves in the shoes of that selling doctor and recognize that the selling doc likely has had that practice for 30 to 35 years. There's a lot of emotion that goes into that. In most instances, they're not simply looking at the dollar at the end of the day. They're thinking about and considering their patients, their team members, their vendors, the community, their profile in the community. All of these emotions are coming into that. And so the more discussions we're having with the selling doc before we acquire the practice and understand what their expectations are in consideration of what your expectations are, that has to all be kind of flushed out before we move that forward. It's like a husband and wife, right? Before we walk up to that altar and say, I do, we have likely and hopefully talked about those expectations, whether
Yeah.
it's how are we going to raise our children? What religion? How many
Yeah.
kids do we want to have? Where do
Yeah.
we want to live? Right? All of those things that go into that are the things that we're considering and thinking about with the selling doc. So, as much of the discussion that we can have before we sign off on an asset purchase agreement. So, some of those things that we're asking is, well, hey, what's your expectation post closing? Were you expecting to work? Did you want to work? Did you not want to work? Are you willing to stick around? Are you willing to be available for some consulting if questions come up? Would love your help on understanding your patient base. Would love to understand the community and what works and what doesn't work from a marketing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The more questions that you ask the selling doc, the better understanding you'll have as to what he or she is actually looking for. And I think by doing that, we, and this is a phrase I use a lot, minimize disruption and therefore maximize profit, meaning
Sure.
post closing, we minimize disruptions by having understood the expectations and therefore written those into the agreements. So if we have a doc that does want to stay for a period of time and we have determined that that would work, we have worked that into an employment agreement. We have laid out the expectations very clearly of what would happen ultimately if it doesn't work in terms of the transition of that doctor out of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that to avoid the pitfalls of when it doesn't work. And yes, we have plenty of stories of where that goes wrong.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I don't want to go too far into the
No, this is
details
great.
of that.
This is great. It's as you're talking, I'm thinking not of necessarily of my personal experience in my practice, but just of all these instances where, people could have benefited from some guidance, or maybe they lucked out, didn't experience some of those, you know, tough or horrible transitions that you're thinking of in your head. As you mentioned that, here's where my head goes, and I'd love to get your thoughts. Do you watch The Office?
I have watched The Office, and
Okay.
actually, I'm repeating The Office
Oh
because I
yeah.
have a young son that has been going through all and watching them as well. So I'm sitting with him and watching them.
It's the best. Yeah, I've done that for years too. But there's the scene where I forget the context, but Michael Scott says, "Yeah, I've gone hunting before, shot the deer in the leg, and it took 4 hours to bleed out. Why do you ask?" And you're talking about a transition with a doctor. Sometimes I feel like selling doctors have this idealistic view of what will happen when they want to stay on in a practice. And I've seen this and advised clients in this capacity where a seller doctor is staying on and there's no real clear path to how that's going to happen. Let's remember this, in this instance, we're buying a single doctor practice that is producing X amount. Well, on day one, how do we support two doctors in that practice? Or what is the benefit of keeping a seller doctor around? Oftentimes, I feel like the seller doctor just thinks that it's going to be easy for them to stick around doing kind of whatever they want to do. But yet the new buyer almost feels hampered by that seller being around. And on top of that, if we have a seller that's staying around from a leadership standpoint, who's the real boss when a buyer comes in? I've seen that happen where it's really messy and you've got a buyer who wants to hit the ground running. They want to be a good leader. They want to get the team on board. But even if that seller's around for, shoot, even just a day a week, practicing as a hobby, seeing out their cases or what have you, it's almost like the buyer isn't the boss. The seller, who is now an associate, a part-time associate, is still the boss. And the buyer has trouble making real tangible progress and molding that practice the way they want it. So do you see that in those transitions?
Absolutely. So when I look at this from a best practice perspective, and what I like to see most of the time, and there are brokers that discourage this, but I'm going to tell you my thoughts. Before we close on that practice, as the buying doctor, I want to be introduced to the team members beforehand. I want to shadow the selling doc. I want to have the selling doc introduce me to the team, maybe even introduce me to some of the patients. Why do we do that? We do that because the best situation is, and usually for the selling doc as well, is that we do a sale and close and the doc walks away. Certainly we're going to celebrate that doc. Maybe they're retiring, maybe they're not, maybe they're moving and working somewhere else. There's going to be some sort of a celebration of that doctor. But we want that separation, and we get that by having a pre-closing introduction of the buying doctor to all the processes within the business. And therefore, it's not a true just buy and walk away. I've been in there for 30, 45 days already, not on a regular basis as the buyer, but I've been introduced. Everybody's aware of the transaction. Everybody's aware that something's occurring. And it puts me in a much better position so that when I do close, everybody knows me already. It wasn't Thursday at 2:00, and the first time they met me was Thursday at 1:59 p.m. And now all of a sudden I own this practice and nobody knows who I am.
Right.
And also the benefit of that is there is nobody looking over my shoulder. The team members are looking to me as the owner and the boss and the one to make the decisions. They're not necessarily hearing from one of the team members that Dr. Smith likes to do it this way, and this is not how we typically would do it, because the doc is still coming in on Wednesdays and Fridays as the selling doc. So we minimize those types of communications as well. And I think overall, what it does too is that as the buyer, who we have to remember as young folks, all of us were at some one point, we all have self-doubt. We all have self-doubt even today. I certainly still do. And so that self-doubt is impacted when that selling doc is still in there. By not having the selling doc in there, it forces us to make decisions and to do things and to grow as a business owner. And therefore really being thrown into the water, right?
Yes.
Saying, I got to figure this out.
Yes, 100%.
We've talked before where you had a piece of machinery break down on you before, and you found out the morning when you were supposed to be seeing patients. And how do you deal with that? Well, guess what? You got to figure it out.
You figure it out. Yeah. Yeah. The power goes out while you're in the middle of a crown prep. What do you do? The server goes down. There's a million examples. What do you do? So many times in starting a practice, acquiring a practice, I say this over and over on the podcast. You're jumping out of a plane and you're building your parachute on the way down.
That's right.
And that is not, again, that's not saying be reckless. That's not saying you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it. Like, it's just that there's so many, you can never be fully prepared. And I love that you brought that aspect of it, because I think sometimes people who haven't been in ownership or haven't had the perspectives that we had think that having a seller doctor there is going to make things easier, but it oftentimes makes it much, much harder. Now, I will say, if there's a clear reason for them to be there, such as they place implants and you don't, and they want to, it makes sense for them to stick around and place some implants, help you learn how to place implants, help bridge some gaps like that in the practice, then sure, I guess that could work. Or I guess if you have, this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but if there's some sort of relationship there, if they were a mentor to you and a longtime partner doctor, maybe they employed you as an associate and now you're purchasing the practice from them and they become the associate, and you're still maintaining the same number of doctor days in that practice, well, then that makes a lot of sense too, versus a kind of a random, call it a random doctor who you're acquiring a practice from, and they say they want to stay on. And in essence, even though they're working for you, you're becoming partners in a way. And partnerships are like marriages, like you alluded to. So yeah, I think a lot of the time, it's funny too. You mentioned that ramp up period. And we've talked about a number of mutual clients where we want that ramp up period of 30, 45, 60 days for a number of different reasons, right? We've got buyers who have notices that they have to give to their associateships legally.
That's right.
We've got insurance credentialing that needs to happen, which we could spend hours talking about strategy there, but the more time, the better. And we've got our ducks that we want to get in a row in the transition of the practice. And that's such an important time period. But again, not poo-pooing brokers or at all, but oftentimes it's suggesting that 60-day ramp up period before close tends to be met with angst or a desire to rush things, or it can be by a broker or a seller. And like you said, if that is truly a deal breaker, we want to be operating from a position of power where we can feel comfortable to walk away. If that's truly a deal breaker and that seller can sell it to somebody else on the same terms and not have that period, then go for it. That's not the right practice for us, right? We have to make sure we are operating on our terms as much as possible. So you struck a nerve there, because it's funny how all practices are different, but in a lot of ways they are the same.
That's right. And typically it's usually a broker that pushes back on that. And I certainly have been and worked with many selling docs in terms of selling their practices over the years as well. And I can only think of one situation where a buyer walked away after being introduced to the team. That's the concern.
What happened there?
Yeah, in that particular instance, I was on the sales side working with the doc, and the buyer ultimately, as was communicated to us, got cold feet and chose not to pursue an actual practice acquisition at the time. It had nothing to do with the particular selling doctor. They just chose not to move forward at that particular time. And so not much we can do about that. So that's the risk we hear from the brokers, is that there's going to be disruption in the practice if you introduce someone and they ultimately walk away. But from a practical perspective, it doesn't happen. And really, from a legal perspective, you can protect against that by signing the agreement before you make that introduction, right? I mean,
Right.
we can sign a purchase agreement beforehand, and it will make it very difficult for that person to walk away at that time. And in most instances, they don't want to walk away, and they won't. So I think more times than not, it's a better position both for the buying doctor as well as for the selling doctor to have that transition period where they're involved in the process. And if the selling doctor really cares about their team, it actually is much better for the team as well.
Mm-hmm.
It allows them to meet the doc, get comfortable with the doc, understand that there's going to be a transition, for them to accept that in their own mind as well. We have team members that you may have worked for 20 years. Do you want to just let them know at Thursday at 2:00 that I sold and I'm walking away? Or do you want to kind of slowly introduce them to that concept over a period of time? I have found that the slowly introducing it over a period of time has always worked best.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I like that idea, and it then helps us with the transition of the selling doc at that point as well, and allowing us to kind of move that forward. And not to change subjects, but it also helps, especially if there's maybe another associate doctor in the practice, in terms of building that relationship up as well, because those are things that we also have to be considering and thinking about.
Yeah, before we go down that road, two thoughts I had on what you just mentioned that I've seen is, it is in your best interest, if you're someone who's looking to acquire practice, it is in your best interest as a buyer to have a great relationship with the seller. I'm not saying you have to be buddies or you have to agree on everything. You probably disagree on a lot of things. And I hope you find a practice that could even be underperforming and you have a vision of improving what the seller doctor is doing. But it is in your best interest to have a great relationship through this process and to appeal to the emotional side of the seller. Like you said, Vince, as a seller, for a lot of us, as we get on in practice, this is our baby. It's our livelihood. It's something we've worked on for years and years. So yeah, we want to get what it's worth, but all things being equal, we want it to go to someone who's going to carry on our legacy and take care of our community and Not have our patients say, wow, Dr. Vogt really screwed us over by just selling it to that goober who took over things, right?
That's right.
We don't want that. I hope we don't want that. So I always encourage the buyers, if I'm working with somebody in this situation, I want them to go to lunch with the seller, go grab coffee, talk. Oftentimes, you're going to be a lot younger than this person, right? Talk to them, be buttoned up, like be professional, show them that you are going to carry on the legacy of their practice in the way that they desire. Now, you might want to change a million things about this practice and how they do things, but to them, just show them that you're going to carry on their legacy in a respectful way. Then, as a seller, if I've met with you and I go home to my wife that night and I say, wow, I met with this young doc and she really seemed to have the patient's best interest in mind, and you have a good feeling about a potential buyer, well, then you're a lot more likely to concede or work together on aspects of the deal that are really important versus going in and playing hardball over 20,000 bucks in the purchase
That's right.
price, and just torpedoing any sort of goodwill in the transition. Then in that first scenario, oh, go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to reiterate that I 100% agree with you that I look at relationships as transformational versus transactional.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the selling doctor, if I'm that buyer, I want to ask as many questions as possible. And I want to ask them questions with intentionality. And what I mean by that is that when I ask the question, I truly want to hear an answer versus what you see a lot of times, especially in us attorneys, is we ask a question, but we're not necessarily wanting to hear a particular answer. We just know how we're going to respond already,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Like, I truly want to hear what they have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's also important is I want to understand who this person is as the selling doctor, because understanding who they are will tell me a lot about the team members that they have surrounding them. And it will also tell me a lot about their patients.
Mm-hmm. Good and
Patients,
bad, right? Good and bad.
good and bad. That's what I
Yeah.
mean. Yeah. So patients attract to individuals that are similar to them. So do team members. So we want to better understand and dig into a little bit about that particular selling doctor to see if there are any red flags as part of the overall due diligence that we're doing. So, yes, having dinner. If you're married and he or she is married, having dinner with the spouses as well, once or twice, maybe even 3 times, in addition to that coffee chat or in addition to maybe grabbing breakfast on a weekend to better understand the practice. But be a sponge, listen to as much information as you can. Don't be the one talking. Actually ask the question and then
Mm-hmm.
sit back and listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in that scenario, let's say we have a 60, let's say everything's great and we agree and we have to give our 60-day notice to our associateship. So we're waiting, we've signed a purchase agreement and we're waiting. There's that transition period that you alluded to. Well, if you've had a great couple discussions with the seller, you're both happy with things, there's been a peaceful negotiation of terms. And in that 60-day ramp up period, you've got this seller who is feeling very good about you coming into their practice. They are going to sing your praises or reassure patients or reassure team members. And you are going to be, it's going to feel like you're rowing downstream with the current, right? If that's not how things are going, then it's going to feel like you're going against the current. And I agree with you so much. It's let's form a relationship or let's figure out a way to make this work for both parties. It's really easy as buyers to get focused on me in the situation, but honestly, focusing on the seller and their perspective as well can be really, uh, it's extremely important to see where their perspective is on the entire thing. One other thing before we kind of transition to, you had mentioned associates or anything else you wanted to talk about too, is I do think that this asking questions and looking for real answers, I think is important. And one thing that resonated with me was the team, because I do think that sometimes as buyers, seeing deals before the practice is acquired and even soon after, working with doctors on both of those scenarios. The team is important. Ideally, we want to keep the team in place. We hope that they're an awesome team and everything's A plus all the time, but you and I both know that's just not the case. It's not realistic. So I think it's very good intel from a seller doctor. Just be honest with me about the team. Just be 100% honest with me about every single team member. Dish, gossip, tell me everything you think, honestly, right? And then you can get such good information, such as I've got a 20-year assistant, and she's told me once or twice that when I leave, she's probably going to leave. Okay. Is that good? Is that bad? Well, I think there's pros and cons to that potential scenario, but we want to know as much as possible so that if we have that intel, and this is a real life scenario that's going on right now, if we have that intel, let's flesh that out with the assistant. Again, let's look at this from her perspective. Let's make this work for everybody. And if she wants to leave, if she wants to retire, we'll celebrate that and we'll bring in somebody to replace her versus not having that information or letting the team or the employees kind of control the entire situation. And that's when you run into where, those tough scenarios where day one, you've got a couple people giving their notice or not showing up for work. I mean, the doomsday scenarios, right? So getting that information out in the open and also just not being afraid of change in the transition. I do think it's ideal, especially early on, to have as many things be the same as possible, very, very early on in the transition. But we cannot be afraid of, as we're going through our research or as we're meeting the team, if we identify a bad apple or someone who we have that feeling deep down isn't going to be the right fit, that's okay. Like, we shouldn't just hang on to people just to hang on to people. And oftentimes in these meetings or early on in the transition, you might even get feedback from a team member as you get to know them. And they're like, thank you so much for letting the hygienist go. She was a thorn in our side. And it's a way to galvanize the team, right? So right. Having an open mind, it all comes back to having just more information, asking good questions, and really getting to know the practice that you're buying.
Exactly. So when you're going into this with these open-ended questions, and then again, truly sitting back and listening and being authentic about that in terms of just wanting to listen, you will be surprised the amount of information that the doc will share with you, and you will be surprised at the amount of information that you learn and that will ultimately be helpful as part of that transition. So it's a big deal. And when you go into it, again, back to that transformational versus transactional of really wanting to know what's in the best interest of the selling doctor, man, does it go well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I just be good. And that's what it comes to.
Mm-hmm. It's like our patients. I view patient care as a relationship. I'm not fixing your tooth. How can I help you accomplish your goals? Because every single person who walks into your practice, if you're listening, has a different goal, a different reason why they're there. They might have similar reasons, but everybody's life is different. It's the same thing with a transaction of a practice. What is your goal in this scenario? And how can I help you, or how can I make that work for both of us? And like you said, Vince, when that happens, it just feels good and things just come together versus when it's adversarial. And so again, too, that comes back to being open-minded and not being afraid to walk away if a practice doesn't fit your criteria or your gut doesn't tell you that this is the right fit. So exactly. This is awesome stuff. Is there anything else that kind of is on your mind as far as you have a doctor who is going through a transition or recently bought a practice and you wish they would do X, Y, Z differently?
Well, certainly we could stay on for a long time.
Yeah. Give me one more and we'll keep this going in future episodes.
For sure. So the one thing that we've talked about a number of times is the broker and the broker relationship. I'll just mention something about that. No different than every other profession, whether you're an attorney, an accountant, a dentist, an electrician, we have good and bad in every profession. So considering and thinking about the broker relationship from the buyer's perspective is important as well. We do have some brokers that will want a buying doctor to sign a broker agreement in terms of dual representation and some other nuances related to the relationships. And I would just caution really any buying doc that is looking to potentially acquire a practice about what that relationship looks like and who your advisors are, and when it comes to that, and just be careful about those particular brokers. And not saying that they're trying to do something bad, good, whatever that may be. I've just seen that not work out well in many instances in terms of the overall relationship. So that one kind of jumps out at me as I'm thinking about it, since we've mentioned brokers a number of times. And then I guess I'll just end on, and yes, you said early on in our discussion the idea that this may come across as self-serving, but surround yourself with strong team members, not only the team members within the practice, but also your advisors. And I kind of follow this concept. And again, I did not come up with this, but it's who, not how. As soon as something comes up that needs to be done, you ask who can do this for me, not how I can do it. The whole idea is that I'm spending the time of what I bring to the table as my most valuable tool. And as a doc, your most valuable tool, at least at the beginning, is my hands. As a clinician,
these babies are insured.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's surrounding yourself with high valued team members that have the specific focus in dentistry to make sure that you're really setting yourself apart from your colleagues in the business, because there's a lot that are out there. And just doing it right from the beginning requires you to surround yourself with team members that are going to give you objective, direct guidance, whether you like to hear it or not. They're going to let you know how it is.
Yeah.
So,
yes. I mean, you are preaching to the choir here. Everyone in this audience knows my story. I started my practice from scratch. I had an advisor that was going to help me kind of casually and then ghosted me. I don't know what happened to the guy, legitimately. You and I have talked about this ad nauseum. And so I'm starting my practice without any guidance, without an accountant, without much legal guidance. It's all on my own. And I figured it out. But what I'm happy I finally figured out after that was get a good accountant, get a coach. You know, I've sung the praises of Justin, who started TLP, who was my coach very early on in my career. Best thing I ever did, because I realized, okay, I have a vision. I'm good at certain things, but there's only so much I can do in a day. And shoot, this was before I had kids. You know,
that's right.
I mean, so finding people who can help you along the way. Again, sure, this might sound self-serving, but it's the honest to goodness truth, is you've got to surround yourself with good people. And this is in your practice too. As I've gone on, and I'm still young in my career, I've come to appreciate and value the team members in my practice more and more with each day. I want to empower them to do their jobs, to do great things for our patients without me feeling like I have all the answers and I'm perfect and I know all the time. And I think the sooner that one can get into that mindset in dentistry and in entrepreneurship in general, the better off you'll be. It's almost transformational when you start to think like that. I'm so glad you brought that up. And not to just rush into this next point, but when you mentioned your outlook on brokers, I don't want to sound like I'm poo-pooing anyone in that field. There are good ones, there are bad ones, just like any field. But I always encourage clients, dentists, to look at any relationship and ask this question: what is their angle, or what's their benefit? Someone like a broker, they're going to get paid when they sell a practice, right? That's not to say that they're trying to screw you over if they're trying to push you along or they're pushing back on something, but they get paid when they sell a practice, just like when you're working with a realtor, right? They get paid when you buy or sell a house. That's just a fact of the matter. So always understand what the angle is, or what the benefit of an interaction is to the person that you're working with. And that often clarifies a lot of things, both in dentistry, working with brokers, or really anything in life. It's like, what's the angle here? And just wrap your head around that. And I think that's something that can be really beneficial.
I love that, actually. And that kind of goes back to that transactional versus transformational, when clearly the broker there is transactional, not transformational, right? In terms of, let's sell this deal, give me my 6% or whatever that is, and I'm going to move on to the next one. Again, that's not a bad thing. It's just knowing what that is for you, and is that the best person to be giving you the guidance and advice related to what you're hopefully investing your next 30 years in, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's probably, maybe not, but your biggest asset that you're going to end with at some point at your retirement. And so, man, I want to do it right the first time.
Yes, seriously, just know what everybody's angle is. I got a guy quoting me on, fixing my driveway out here as I look to my right. And I understand that he has a job to do and he wants to do the job, but he also has, there's about 100 guys who could do his job within a mile radius here, right? So
That's
I
right.
know he's incentivized in that case to provide value to me and be honest to me. Because if he says it's going to cost 100 grand, well, I'm going to go to the next guy, get treated fairly. So I have my head wrapped around that situation, but I'm also in this instance and in your practice, I'm not going to waste thousands of hours trying to research how to fix a driveway myself or, gosh forbid, do it myself, right? I just know that's not worth my time. I would rather work in my practice, coach my clients, play golf, do all the things I want to do, and let someone who knows what they're doing help me. So, gosh, Vince, this has been awesome. Any closing remarks? We got to get you back on here at some point and keep picking your brain on some of these things. We've only scratched the surface here talking about acquisitions.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, dentistry has been so good to me and my family over the years. I have built wonderful relationships. It's just an industry that, as I look back, I would have never thought that I was where I am at today. And so, relationships with folks like you and the work that you're doing out there with your clients and your colleagues, it's awesome and it's fun to talk about. I could do it all day long. So, I appreciate you having me on.
Amen, man. I agree with you. Well, we'll have to get you back on and talk about something else interesting. I learn something new every time I talk to you. So I very much appreciate you both for what you've done for me and just advising me, and then for a number of our clients now as the years have gone on. So thanks so much for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
Again, I want to say thanks to Vince for coming on to the show. And I hope that our two-part conversation here provided you with some information that will make you a better practice owner, whether it's now or in the future. Vince is a guy he's experienced just about everything in his position advising dentists. And on top of that, he's just a great guy. And I just love working with great people, to be quite honest. So, as I mentioned before, Vince's information, should you need to get a hold of him, is in the show notes. His email is in there. And I just encourage you to have his name in the back of your head should you ever need his guidance in your practice. You can also get a hold of me or any of us at TLP at thelifestylepractice.com, or you can shoot me an email, matt@thelifestylepractice.com. Let me know what's on your mind. Let me know if or how I can help you elevate your life and career and create your very own lifestyle practice. I wish you all the best. I wish success upon all of you who are listening to this podcast, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Take care.